Today we're actually going to take a pause from our American Civil War series. I decided, well, not the American Civil War, but Battle of Gettysburg. I decided, you know what? This might be seen as grifting or taking advantage of the times we're living in, but I know for a fact people love videos on the presidents of the United States. So today I decided I'm going to jump headfirst into this. I'm going to do my own presidential tier maker. Now, before we get into that, let me just make something apparent. I will not be doing any of the modern presidents. Now, who are the modern presidents? Well, Joseph Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan. I will not be covering any of them. I'm doing this because they're too close to modern day, and because they're too close to modern day, I really do not want to, one, deal with the headache it is to have them as, you know, putting my opinions out there. Because again, this is a history channel. This is not a political channel. Yes, have I touched very hot button topics? Yes, we discussed Gaza. Yes, we discussed Israel. We've discussed the Nazis. We've discussed this. We've discussed that. It's a history channel. Those things are gonna come up, but because a lot of what I'm going to judge the presidents off of will be policy based, I'm not going to. This is an apolitical channel. Of course, biases are going to come through. That's the reality of everything. We all have our biases, and they will come through. But I'm going to do my best to not have them come through. So, with that, no Reagan, no George H.W., no Bill, no George W., no Barack, no Donald, and no Joe. We are only covering presidents from George Washington to Jimmy Carter. Which, you know what? Jimmy Carter, it sucks, but I don't consider him a modern president. He's right in that preface. So, thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new to the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Please subscribe. I look at the views. I know where they're coming from. Half of you aren't even subscribed. You're just returning to watch the videos. Please, please, please subscribe. Let's get into it. One. Alright, so this is one of our bigger tier systems. So we're gonna have S, A, B, B, C, well, S, A, B, B minus, C plus, C, C minus, D plus, D, and E will be worse. Actually, D's not even going to be worse. What I'm going to do, E's not even going to be worse. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put Reagan, I'm going to put them in order. George H.W., Bill W., the Barack, the Donald, and I just realized, I don't think, Biden's actually not even on this one. This might be an older one, that's why. But, so these 7, technically, 6 here, I will not be doing. I'll be doing everyone else, though. So, we're going to start with the big man. Number 1. So, Washington, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to put him in superb. Well, actually, no, here. We'll put them in limbo here at E until, as we discuss him. So, Washington's first president. I have a friend that loves George Washington. He says he's the best president that ever lived. It's really hard to make that observation when you're the first. He set all the precedents. So, the cabinet, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, which at the time was Secretary of War, first held by Henry Knox. Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. His first Secretary of State was indeed Thomas Jefferson, which actually, that used to be your foothold to the presidency. It wasn't the vice presidency, it was the presidency. Because what it used to be was, our system used to be a lot different way back. It used to be the president was the one who won the most electoral votes, and then the vice president was the runner-up. We changed that, obviously. It was actually under Jefferson that would get changed to it just being the president and vice president would run as a pair, and then whoever lost, lost. Because that's also where you had the two-party system really going out of control. But Washington was a very good leader for the time. He was president. Of course, he's the first president, but he's president during the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution was a very decisive moment, not only for France, but for the United States. George Washington recognized that. He was like, first of all, we're not in the place to do this. We just got out of our own revolution. Second of all, the might of the British Empire still rests on our doorsteps. You know, the Caribbean, you have Jamaica, you have the Bahamas, you have all these colonies there. But you also have all of Canada. The entire northern half of North America is held by the British still. So Washington, when the French ambassador comes to him and says, you have to fight with us, you have to fight for these principles that you brought to France, which Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin brought to France. Washington's like, absolutely not. He's like, we are in no place to do this. This is insanity. You're out of your minds if you think we're getting involved. You know, he also was his person. He was one of these cult of personality people. You know, one of the most famous things was actually before he was president. And I know I'm supposed to be strictly talking presidency here, but there's this beautiful moment when there was almost a military dictatorship in this country. A lot of people don't realize that. You know, I don't care what you say about the last couple of years. The Continental Army was furious with Congress, and they were willing to march on Congress and pretty much take over the government. But what ended up happening was Washington went to Congress, went to the army while they were discussing it, and it was in this barn, and it was really dark, and he had really bad eyes, and the war had aged him, which the war will age anyone. And he said, let me read this notice. I believe it was from John Adams. And he had a struggle reading it in the dark, so he took out his spectacles and he said, pardon me, you know, among other things, I've lost my sight for the sake of my country. And it was a really beautiful moment, and it actually stopped this uprising that almost happened. Later on, he would stop Jay's Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. He would stop I don't think it was Jay's Rebellion. I think it was just the Whiskey Rebellion. He would stop it because he was like, this is not right. And the fact that they saw him, George Washington, in his uniform, marching out to meet them, they left. I don't think anyone was actually killed. He just put it down. Now, of course, there's contradictions to George Washington. You know, the man was a slave owner. He was from Virginia. And, you know, you need to, I understand we live in this time where we are basing historical events off our own vision. But you need to realize that this time period, Virginia, first of all, was the most important state to this new union. Virginia was the biggest state. It held the most political power. Think about, Virginia used to be called the birthplace of presidents. Ohio now holds that rank. But Virginia used to be where all the presidents were from. So you need to understand in the context of the time. And, you know, Washington was one of these guys who understood that contradiction. And he spoke out against it. And, of course, he's a hypocrite. He's human. The biggest failure, I think, of humanity is we put certain people as deities. And George Washington was a great man. He was a great president. And you know what? I will put him at S. You need to understand, he's the first. He was the first one to make this office. He was the first one to recognize what the office was. He was the one who established 2 terms. But, you know, you have some people like FDR who decided to keep going. And you know what? One of my favorite presidents is Theodore Roosevelt. Me and my girlfriend, it was actually what we bonded in our relationship about, was Theodore Roosevelt. But you need to understand that you can't just see the bad. You need to see both sides. And George Washington, I believe until the end, will be viewed as one of our best presidents. He's actually a member of the Cincinnati Society, which Cincinnati was named after a Roman consul named Cincinnatus, who they made dictator of Rome. And what happened was, once Rome was safe, he relinquished his power and retired to the country. Hamilton does a great show in One Last Time. That song's beautiful, talking about, sit under the olive tree and everything. And that is why I believe he belongs S tier. He could have been king for life if he really wanted to, and he chose to step down. Oh, okay. This is going to be a long video just based on my first one. Alrighty. John Adams. Now, John Adams is a very interesting character. He is the founder of the Navy, which, in Hamilton, they sing about how Hamilton founded the Coast Guard. John Adams founded the U.S. Navy. He made them a defensible force, which would work out in about 20 years later. Well, 10 years later. He would be president from 1797 to 1801. He will be a one-term president. He was kind of a surprise. No one really expected him to be president. But, during the Revolution, John Adams was doing everything. He was the de facto Secretary of the Army. He helped write the Declaration of Independence. They sent him to France to treat with Louis XVI. Then they sent him to Amsterdam to deal with the Dutch because Benjamin Franklin was getting annoyed by how combative Adams was. Adams was a combative Massachusetts lawyer. And, for my friends here that are from Massachusetts, including Nick, as you know from the podcast, they're very fiery people, much like us New Yorkers. John Adams is kind of painted very badly by history because Washington did his best to stop the two-party system while being president. Adams really did nothing to stop it. Adams was a Federalist. His vice president would be Thomas Jefferson, who the two men were actually very close friends. Both actually would die hours apart on July 4th. But the thing is, you need to understand, a lot of the time we say history is written by the victors. Adams will be the first and last Federalist president. No short fault to Alexander Hamilton. Now, and I feel a duty to help Adams here a little bit because I believe Adams has been dealt a wrong hand by history. Adams, people remember the bad, the Alien Sedition Act. You can't speak out against the government. Federalism, it was very much more about central government. They wanted more power to the central government, and the Democratic Republicans, which is Thomas Jefferson's party, which would become the Democrats of today, they were much more about individual states' rights. Now, before I get bombarded in the comments about what I just said, Democratic Republicans were where the Democrat Party would come from. They would be the Democratic Republicans until Andrew Jackson, and then they would become the Democratic Party, which I know some of my Democratic friends here probably are not happy to hear that Andrew Jackson is the founder of their party, but a reality is reality. That's why the donkey is their symbol. But because it's so stubborn, like Andrew Jackson. But Adams, he wasn't really playing it by politics. He was actually kind of, 1797, 1801, what's going on? The French Revolution's over, but the Napoleonic Wars have begun. You have to deal with the XYZ affair. When the French ambassador, Talleyrand, was trying to extort us just to meet with him to discuss trade. The Jay Treaty, all these things that people were afraid of. Hamilton was trying to encourage Adams to take the strike first. Adams was very much, Adams was neutral. He didn't want to be involved in what was going on in Europe. He wanted to follow George Washington's policy of isolationism. Hamilton, on the other hand, strongly believed the pretender Bonaparte, as he called him. He believed that Napoleon was going to launch a full-scale invasion of North America, knock out British Canada, and take over the United States. Now, Napoleon did have a plan to attack North America. It's not clear if part of his plan was to attack the United States, but I believe what Napoleon ended up saying when they finally did sign a treaty at the end of Adams' term was, there is no reason for there to be animosity between France, the republics of France and the Republic of the United States. We are simply brothers who had a disagreement, and the treaty was signed. Hamilton would actually be dismissed as an advisor. In the play Hamilton, it makes it look like he was a member of Adams' government. He never was a member of Adams' government. He stacked Adams' government, but Adams had enough of Hamilton's meddling. Hamilton was not a well-liked guy by any means. He was very much, I don't even know what to describe him as. He was very much a guy who knew how to put his hands into everything. And Adams did not like feeling he was controlled by Hamilton. But Hamilton controlled the party. So when the election would come, Adams would lose a blowout to Jefferson. And Jefferson's the runner-up, who in a two-party system technically would have been Adams, but because of the way the system was at this time, it was Aaron Burr of New York. And he became vice president, but it'll be during that term that the office would be changed. So John Adams, I believe, gets a bad rap. I'm not going to say he's the greatest president. He diverted war, though, with one of the largest military powers at the time. Napoleon Bonaparte had defeated Austria. He had think about his term again. 1797, 1801. He defeated the British at Toulon. He defeated the Mamelukes in Egypt. He defeated the Austrians in Italy. He was fighting another war of coalition, where about 3 years out from the declaration of the empire. Napoleon is a powerhouse. And Adams diverted pulling the United States into that war. Because that would have been the First World War had Adams not navigated it the way he did. So I'm not going to make him superb, and I'm not going to make him an A. I'm going to give him a B-, because, again, the Alien Sedition Act, and I'm going to do another very controversial one as this show goes on, because I have very strong opinions on the taking of rights from citizens. And the Alien Sedition Act, which you could debatably say wasn't actually from him. A lot of people point fingers to Hamilton's surrogates, and they're the ones who actually caused it. I don't really teeter on that. You're the president. At the end of the day, what happens is your call. I could blame Washington for allowing the two-party system to happen, but he was able at least to keep things in control. Adams did not. Adams succumbed to pressure from his party. The man was dignified, though. I would debatably say Adams is our founding father. He is the one. He pushed for the vote on independence. If you ever see the play 1776, there's literally a song called "Sit Down, John," that it's all about Adams yelling at everyone else in the Congress saying, "Let's vote on this and call it a day." I do believe he's a B- on this scale. Again, not a bad president. Made mistakes, curtailed the rights of the citizens. But, I just like Washington, we need to look at the times he lived in. Also, another thing, he was actually the first president to actually never have owned slaves, and also was an outspoken abolitionist. So enjoy that. Thomas Jefferson. All right, Mr. Jefferson. A lot. The thing is all about some of these guys, these early ones, they were very active in the Revolutionary era. I'm sorry, give me one moment. Thomas Jefferson famously writes the Declaration of Independence, famously ambassador to France, helps write the Declarations of Rights of Men in France, liberté, égalité, fraternité. He is a powerhouse in his own right. He has done so much he's a young guy. We look at these paintings of these guys and they're very old looking. They were very young, a lot of these guys, when the revolution happened. But Jefferson, he is responsible for the two-party system. That was not a good thing. That probably has caused more issues than anything else. A lot of people say two parties are saying the same thing in just different ways, which is really how it got founded, because you had Hamilton, who believed in a strong central government, and you had Jefferson, who believed in states' rights trumping the federal government. And then, obviously, that will be in the future a big issue. But Jefferson actually doubled the size of the United States through Napoleon Bonaparte. He will purchase Louisiana Territory, ironically, through a loan through the Bank of London that Napoleon would use to actually attempt to invade England. But he would double the size of the country. He would commission the Lewis and Clark expedition, which would finally map out the entire continent and figure how far it is from Maryland, which I'm just going to say Maryland because that's where Washington, D.C. is. Oh, and for John Adams, he's also the first president to live in Washington and the White House. But Jefferson would order Lewis and Clark from Washington all the way to the Pacific, connecting the two seas and finally mapping it. He advocated, he was a fan of the Elastic Clause, but he also advocated limited government, which is ironic by doubling the size of the country. Because the thing is, you can't just double the size of the country and not have federal control of it. You know, like you have to make those into territories that fall under federal jurisdictions. You have to have officers who take care of those areas, generals. We weren't a standing army. We had militias. So pretty much you're sending frontiersmen out there to start settling these lands. The U.S. Army at this time is very small. But overall, Jefferson probably is one of our better presidents. He actually advocates the end of slavery in Virginia after he was president, which was a big, like, come on. Like, this is a period that, Chris over at Vlogging Through History always says this. This is the passing the buck period. We're not going to discuss this because we're so new and so fragile that we don't want to lose the other states. He also famously had the scandal, I guess you could call it, that him and his slave, Sally Hemings, were said to have an affair, which made it a little more scandalous when you find out that Sally Hemings was actually his wife's half-sister. But he would die on July 4th. His term, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention his term, was 1801 to 1809. So he will be president throughout the crisis in Europe, as we'll say, and crisis in South America, because you need to remember the Spanish will fall. The Bourbons will fall from Spain, and Napoleon will have his brother Joseph installed. But with that, the entire South American continent declares independence. I believe that will actually happen more under James Madison, but it's very tumultuous time for Jefferson. He followed Washington's policy of isolationism, and he also did 2 terms. You need to realize, again, these are guys, and this is a period the Democrat Republicans control the country. People are voting for them. They like their outlook on things. They like how, people are afraid to go back to a tyrannical government like London. So they like that Jefferson is very much more like, no, you deal with you, we'll just deal with interstate issues. So with the exception of Louisiana Purchase, I do believe the man was a man of principles as well, and I think that's very important with these guys. They did have their principles, and much like Washington, yes, the man was a slave owner. Sadly, that's just how it is. It's the period. That's just how it is. It is cool though, and I might leave a link to it. There's a picture of Jefferson next to one of his descendants. And it's a black kid. It's a black guy, and he actually is wearing the same outfit as Jefferson. So I thought that was really funny. I'm gonna put him at B. I don't want to. I'm not gonna sit here and praise Jefferson because again, this isn't about what he did before he was president. This is about what he did when he was president. I feel he was very principled, but also slightly hypocritical. Alrighty, to the father of the Constitution, Mr. James Madison. Now, James Madison will be president from 1809 to 1817. Now, those years are extremely important. That's the Napoleonic Wars. That is War of the Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Waterloo. That is the 100 Days, or the Sixth Coalition, as it's known. Madison, again, father of the Constitution, wrote the Federalist Papers, ironically, with Alexander Hamilton. Was not a fan of Alexander Hamilton. But he pretty much continued on what Jefferson did. He was Jefferson's Secretary of State. Like I said, Secretary of State was kind of the heir presumptive of the party at the time. You know, Jefferson was Washington's, Madison, Adam. It goes on. Madison will be the first U.S. president to ask Congress for a declaration of war. And it will be against the United Kingdom. So the way to look at it is the Federalist Party were very, you could say, pro-England. Hamilton and Adams thought it was better to be friendly with England than not. England was the superpower of the era. You know, France, yes, it's a rising superpower, again, under Napoleon. But of this era, England pretty much from the late 1700s until World War II, is the superpower of the world. They control most land. They have the most population, trade, economy. Everything is in their favor. So the Federalists' belief was, let's not mess with the English. Let's make them our friends. Let's get trade going with them and everything. The Democratic Republicans, on the other hand, were very pro-France. They liked what the French were doing. I believe Madison and Jefferson were abhorred when Napoleon did declare himself emperor, but Napoleon, we look at Napoleon through a very Anglophile thing. I'm not going to get into a whole thing about Napoleon, but Napoleon pretty much liked to call himself the son of the French Revolution. He followed the ideal, so to speak. I have a whole series on Napoleon. If you want to talk about Napoleon more, go watch those videos. But for this video, let's just say Democratic Republicans pro-France, Federalists pro-England. Madison would declare war on the United Kingdom for forcing American sailors to serve in the English fleet. Now, this is kind of a good and bad. It's good in the fact that he did lead. He was one of the last U.S. presidents to actually, as president, be a field commander. He led the U.S. Army in the field during the War of 1812. He will also, however, be the president that will lose Washington and the city will be burned down, and his wife will save the portrait of George Washington that still sits in the White House today. The British did burn down the Capitol building. They burned down the White House. So, take that as you want. The war was very unpopular. The British and their armies flooded in through Canada. However, we did win at sea, ironically, thanks to USS Constitution, which is still... It is the oldest active military vessel in the U.S. Navy. It's stationed out of Boston Harbor. Beautiful ship. If you're ever in the Boston area, I would highly suggest go to see it. And we would win again, technically, at the Battle of New Orleans. But that actually would be after the war already technically ended in a stalemate. Again, I'm not going to let his pre-presidency affect it. So... I think C's fair. He's a very... Actually, I think C's fair. Because I don't want to say he's C- because that's like saying he was really bad. Or D, which is just terrible. But C, you know, again, we have the passing the buck. He doesn't really care about the question of, you know, slavery. Because he's a Virginian. He's from the South. So slavery is not really something he's worried about. But he definitely is one of the more notable ones, so I think C's fair. All right, next, our second to last veteran of the American Revolution, and I'll get into that in a second, James Monroe. So like I said, James Monroe fought in the American Revolution. He's a Virginian as well. He will be responsible for the famous Monroe Doctrine. That is pretty much what told Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere, which, you know, he served from 1817 to 1825. So pretty much whatever Spain had not reoccupied before his tenure, they were not getting back in South America. So that included Mexico, Chile, things like big nations in the South like that. So when he made that declaration, which again, you could say what you want, Europe, if they'll take it seriously or not, but pretty much that's it. No more Europe in the Western Hemisphere. You mind your business, we mind our business, and we will protect the Western Hemisphere. Which, to be honest, is Democrat Republican. Bold move. But he, this will be the period that you have 3 Democrat Republicans back to back, which is often indication of what you could call a golden age. This is the age of Democrat Republicans. He, however, did face the economic panic of 1819. It's never really good for presidency, economic issues, as not to get into modern politics, but I grew up during the Great Recession. Things going on right now aren't exactly hot, but it doesn't really reflect well on a presidency. So that definitely was an issue, but it's also called the era of good feelings. He united the country. He passed the buck on slavery. He was a veteran of the American Revolution, as I said before. He's actually in the painting of the crossing of the Delaware. I'm only going to put him at C just because he did nothing to stop, what was coming. The American Civil War is on its way. And the issue is when you're the president, your job is unity. And he did. He united the country. But they aren't answering that question. You have new states coming into the Union. For each free state, you need a slave state. For each slave state, you need a free state just to make sure things don't go crazy. And this is the issue with a lot of these presidents. And that's why I'm going to put him at C. All right. Now we're going into the land of dynasty. That's right. John Quincy Adams. John Adams' eldest son. John Adams had 2 sons, John Quincy Adams and Charles Adams. Charles would die destitute. He was disowned by his parents because of his alcoholism and gambling, and he would die pretty much alone. John Quincy Adams was much more impressive. John Quincy Adams will be president from 1825 to 1829. He knew Russian, he knew Dutch, he knew German. He was one of our only presidents that spoke so many different languages. Jefferson spoke French and English, and I believe Latin, but John Quincy Adams actually followed his father on his tour of Europe. He went to France with him, then he went to Amsterdam, then he sent him to Russia as an adjutant to the U.S. consulate that went to Russia during the Revolution. So he was very well learned. He focused a lot of his presidency on infrastructure. He wanted to build better roads. He wanted to build bridges. He wanted to make canals, harbors. He wanted to continue the era of good feelings. He is also not a Democrat Republican. He's actually a Whig. So the fact that he was elected on the coattails of a Democrat Republican says a lot, especially because he was running against Andrew Jackson, who at the time was a war hero. He's the man who led the defense of New Orleans. So, he is really, this is not, it's impressive that he took it. Many people called him corruption. They think he won the office in a corrupt bargain. He suffered with what a lot of 2-term presidents suffer with, because a lot of times what happens is your first term, you win and your party wins. Midterms are often called a reflection on the administration. So pretty much, yes, it was the era of good times under Monroe, but then Democrat Republicans controlled the Senate, they controlled the House, and then you have John Quincy Adams come in, and everyone's like, you're not a Democrat Republican. So he pretty much got caught up in a lot of gerrymandering, a lot of issues in the House. A lot of things weren't approved. And it made it difficult for him, and it was very difficult for him. He actually will also be the only president that once he leaves office would stay in the government. He would become a member of the House of Representatives, and he would die in Washington, D.C. He would have a heart attack, and ironically, it would be a very tall representative from Illinois who would carry him out of the House floor when he had his stroke. And that would be Abraham Lincoln. He's also one of the presidents we do have a photograph of. I don't believe we have a photograph of him when he was president. It was post-presidency, when he was a representative. So I'm going to put him... I'm going to put him here at the C. Because, again, you know what? He's another one that he ignored the question that we knew was going to lead to what it led to. He was a very good man. He was very fiery man. He was very similar to his father in that aspect. And I think had he not had to fight tooth and nail in the House and Senate, I think he would have gone down as a much better president. But I think just because of that situation, yeah. So next, ironically, will be the man he won against in his election, but then came back, and that will be President Andrew Jackson, the founder of the Democratic Party. Now, when I say he's the founder, I mentioned earlier the mention of the mule. Jackson was a legendary stubborn man. It was his way or the highway. You know, one of the most infamous things from his term is the Indian Removal Act. You know, the House, not the House, sorry. Well, you're talking so much, your throat gets dry, and probably drinking soda doesn't help. The Supreme Court actually said it was unconstitutional. He wasn't allowed to do it. And he famously said, okay, stop me. The Supreme Court doesn't control the police. They don't control the military. The presidency does. He actually expanded the power of the presidency. He made the commons man's democracy. And he's also the first president to pay off the national debt. I think he's the only president, actually, to ever pay off the national debt. He ended the National Bank. He refused to reestablish it. He served from 1829 to 1837. So he did his 2 terms, much like everyone else. And he would he would go down as a very controversial president. Like I said, after him, Democrat-Republicans are done. There's no more Democrat-Republican Party. It is now just the Democratic Party. As opposition is the Whig Party. And the Democrats would actually hold power for a very long time, because the Whigs are often viewed as an offshoot of the British Whig. So it's kind of look like Tories. But Andrew Jackson, he was... Oh, and he is the last president to be an American Revolutionary veteran. He was a spy during the American Revolution, and he had a scar on his face that he actually got as a kid, as a spy. He got whipped across the face by a British regular when he was caught. They didn't kill him, obviously, but, you know. See, the thing is, the national debt thing, like, I hate that he expanded the powers of the presidency, but the national debt thing is pretty, yeah, I'm going to put him at B. I know it's probably going to be a lot of people are going to be upset about that, especially considering I brought up the Indian Removal Act. But you know what, the thing is, he was viewed as a log cabin common man. He really did, honestly. Again, you need to look. You can't look at this through the scopes of today. You have to look at it through the scopes of the time. He was a very popular guy. He also survived an assassination attempt. He got shot at twice. The gun misfired both times. Then he beat the living crap out of the guy who tried to shoot him. Ironically, it was actually Davy Crockett, the frontiersman, who stopped him from beating this guy and making sure he didn't kill him. But I'm gonna put him at B tier. I think he earned that. All right, let's go sideburns. That's right. We're again your boy Martin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. To be completely honest, he's pretty much an offshoot. He follows a lot of Jackson's policies. Jackson was a very quiet, manifest destiny person. Again, he was a frontiersman, of course. He technically was from South Carolina, but Tennessee claims him as theirs. He was very Van Buren was New York Dutch. Actually, he's the first U.S. president that his first language wasn't English. His first language was actually Dutch. Unfortunately, he would have to deal with the economic depression of 1837. That would really hamper his term as president. But what can you do? Sorry, I'm just making sure my notes are correct. All right, so what I'm going to do, I don't like lackeys. I'm going to put them at C-. You're going to see a few of these guys I'm going to put here. I don't like guys that they don't have ideas of their own. And sadly, our next president, give me 1 second. I believe this is him, right? This is William Henry Harrison, right? I think this. Give me one moment. I just want to make sure because I don't want to look like an idiot. Because I did this on the King video and I got criticized by everyone. Yes, okay, thank God. Okay, William Henry Harrison. Great speech maker. Idiot, though, when it came to wearing the correct clothes. Now, that's kind of harsh to say. And it's not actually known if that's really what killed him. To be honest, it is strongly believed he probably got, like, some sickness from Washington itself. People forget this about Washington, D.C., because obviously we live in the modern time, so our infrastructure, what we've done to that city, you know, it's got this beautiful Greco-Roman look now, the government quarter at least. Back then, it was a swamp. The city was literally built on a swamp. The city was chosen as a compromise between Hamilton and the Democratic Republicans to have a national bank established, but also made D.C. the capital of the country. It was also supposed to take part of Virginia, Arlington, and Alexandria, but it ended up not. It just let Virginia keep it. But I know it's a little harsh to put him at D. He was president for 31 days. He was a war hero. He won the Battle of Tippecanoe, but he's president for 31 days. We don't know what he would have done. You know what I mean? It's so funny because in my notes I have next to each president like their terms. So like Marvin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. Ooh, sorry. William Henry Harrison, 1841. It's again, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not trying to be mean to him. For all we know, he could have been the best president of the era, but sadly, there's no way to tell. All right. Next, we have another Virginian. What? More Virginians. Love it. Oh, wow. Interesting. I didn't actually know that. John Tyler. John Tyler is actually the first president, is the only president to serve in the Confederate government. Fun fact. He served as an honorary member of the Confederate House of Representatives. Obviously, he didn't actually serve in it, but I also believe he is the only one. He has grandchildren alive to this day, because a lot of times what would happen is, because he had 15 children. He married his last wife in 1844 when he was president, I believe. Give me 1 second. Sorry. I'm running all over the place. I'm running between my notes and pictures just to make sure I didn't mess up. All right, so he was Harrison's vice president. He'll serve from 1841 to 1845, pretty much just serving out Harrison's term. Again, there's really no rules of succession at this point. It's kind of just, he was a Democratic Republican. Democratic Republicans like that. They're like, yeah, you can stay. Democrats. He annexed Texas, which was a huge step in expansion. Texas is a state of contention still. If you really think about it, Mexico didn't really recognize the treaty Santa Anna wrote because Santa Anna was removed from power. So they didn't really recognize what Santa Anna did, but also, they're not going to fight the United States. But there was a big debate on what the border actually was. The United States said the border was the Rio Grande, which is today the border. Mexico didn't see it that way. It's never great being a vice president who wasn't actually elected. Harrison was voted off his merits, as a war hero, his service in government. So it's really not good to be the guy who succeeds a person like that. It's kind of like Gerald Ford. It's like you're not really supposed to be the president, but because of unfortunate situations, you're now the president. I think because of that, he was just very unpopular. Not really much you could do. I think it's impressive that he has grandchildren still alive. That's kind of crazy. But I'm going to put him here. Sorry, I'm going to have to. The only reason I put him a little higher than Harrison is just because of the Texas annexation. And again, we need to remember, we're playing this game of passing the buck. Oh, no, I'm not dealing with it. This question that keeps getting asked. Texas, it's very deep south. Mason-Dixon line, very deep south. So now a northern state needs to be created to counter Texas. It's just this continuing. Alrighty, James K. Polk. Now, James K. Polk is an interesting character because James K. Polk ran, and he's one of these presidents that actually ran and did everything he said he was going to do. He would actually die a few years after leaving office. He would only serve one term, 1845 to 1849. But in the middle of his term, he would be the one, let's go into what I was saying before about Texas. Polk wanted more. Polk was a student of Jackson. He wanted more. He wanted New Mexico. He wanted California. He knew how he could get it. War. Now, originally, the plan was, we are going to say they have invaded us. Because what was going on was on what the Mexicans viewed as the border. They had outposts, cavalry patrols, stuff you do in your borders back then. So what he had actually done, he ordered General Zachary Taylor, I don't know why I said John. He ordered General Zachary Taylor to move an army onto the Mexican border. Taylor sent scouts out one day. There's a skirmish between the Mexican and U.S. cavalry. U.S. cavalrymen are killed. Mexicans pull back. Americans pull back. Zachary Taylor sends a telegraph saying it's begun. Right before this happened, Polk was on his way to the White House, to the Capitol building, to ask for declaration of war on the basis that there's Mexican troops on American soil. But again, it was in disputed land. Now, with American soldiers being killed, he changed it from Mexican troops on American soil to American blood has been shed on American soil. The entire Congress, but one man, was in favor of the war. And that one man spoke out against it, and he got removed from Congress. And that one man was Abraham Lincoln. He wanted to know where the fight happened. He wanted to know how it happened. Who was involved? Where was it? Because he had made the point to saying, that is contended land, and you knew what you were doing by sending those troops there. Now, the Mexican-American War will be what pretty much controls Polk's presidency. He will have Zachary Taylor invade from the north, and then the infamous if you're from Mexico, famous if you're from the United States, Winfield Scott's march from Veracruz to Mexico City. The United States will win, and we'll occupy Mexico for a little while. This is where a lot of our Civil War generals, people like Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, George Meade, William Field Scott Hancock, Stonewall Jackson, James Longstreet, McClellan, all these guys will serve in this war. And this will be what actually prepares them, so to speak. Polk was an expansionist, and this was one of the first times, we were seen as the aggressors. You know, you could say we won about the War of 1812. You know, you could say, oh, well, they were attacking us first. This is the first time we are advertently it is a war of aggression that we started. We won, so obviously we didn't have to have consequences, but I'm going to put him as C, because I do think good did come out of the war. I also think C plus is actually a little high in thinking about it. Yeah, I'll put him as C minus with Martin Van Buren. You know, the two Jacksonites, as I like to call them. I think they did a lot to help. I think it expanded the country. I think, you know, California wouldn't exist today. New Mexico wouldn't exist today. Pretty much all those territories wouldn't exist today, which are now states. It's just unfortunate the way it happened. And, you know, I like that he did everything he said he was going to do, which, you know, a lot of presidents don't do. So I respect that, at least. All right, now speaking of Zachary Taylor, President Zachary Taylor, 1849 to 1850. He was a hero of the Mexican-American War. He did die in office. You know, he was unfortunate in that case. He did win a second term, and he did. I don't think he won a second term, actually. He only 49 to 50. That's not a second term. He did die in office. He's one of these guys. I'm gonna have to put him with. I'll put him with Tyler instead of Harrison. You know, a year is not a lot of time to see what your policy is really gonna do. Again, he's one of these guys just passing that bill down to the next guy about the what's the slavery question. But then he's gonna be. Sorry, something fell off my wall. But that's going to bring us to Millard Fillmore, 1850 to 1853. Now, a lot of people like to make the point that Millard Fillmore looks a lot like Alec Baldwin. I don't disagree, but that's not really what I see as his biggest connection to this country. He will be a supporter of the Compromise of 1850. That was an attempt to ease tensions between the North and the South. But by doing that, he supported the creation of the Fugitive Slave Act, which would require northern states to capture runaway slaves and return them to the South. This is a hard one. This is actually kind of a hard one. I'm going to put a D+. I'll put him with his president just because you can't really, you know, it's so hard to judge that because it's such an egregious thing by our standards, but also he did try by doing the compromise to ease the tension. So I think he at least kind of has that in his favor. But again, you know, also did this. Messed up, maybe not. No, we're fine. Okay. No, it did. I knew it did. Okay, we're better. Okay, sorry. All right, so off to our next gentleman. That's gonna be President Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce is actually kind of a sad story. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's actually really sad. One of the good things he did, though, was he was part of the Gadsden Purchase, which created U.S. territories in the Southwest. You know, that would be the lands that we did not take during the Spanish-American War. I mean, the Mexican-American War. He would, however, though, have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which would directly lead to Bleeding Kansas, which is what people call the Civil War before the Civil War. Pretty much it was the idea that the states had the right to determine if they'd be free or slave state. Kansas was above the Mason-Dixon line, but also at the same time they were kind of like, well, what are we supposed to do? Because Compromise 1850 is what created the state of Maine when they inducted, I believe, Texas into the Union officially. Was it Texas? It might have been Alabama. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act pretty much was like, the federal government wants nothing to do with this. We'll do this through democracy. The people will move there and they'll vote. This is where people like John Brown rise up, famous abolitionist, but possibly a lunatic. So this is actually what I see more as turning up the heat to a civil war, and I don't think that helps anyone at all. So I'm going to... Oh, but the sad thing about him is on his way to his inauguration, his son got killed. And not just killed, his son got decapitated in front of him. So, yeah, not really great. So I'm going to put him at C- just because, again, no, you know what, honestly, no, D+. Because, again, you're not doing it. You see the problem that's coming, and you just keep trying to obfuscate it to others, which is out of the realm of, why would you do that? Sorry, I get very passionate about this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 presidents. Alright, I'll go up to Buchanan this video just because I feel like this is probably going to go on a long time. We're going to split these into two. So I'll go up to Buchanan with this video, and then we're going to jump, and then I'll release a part 2. So, speaking of which, where's Buck? Old Buck. Fun fact, might have been the first homosexual president. A lot of people think he was actually a closeted gay man. Buchanan, I'm not going to lie, let's put him at D. Did nothing to fix anything that was going wrong. He was a good politician. He was a good diplomat. He was fully aware, because at this time, the Whig Party was being exhumed by the rising Republican Party. It looked like they were going to win in the North. The southern states were threatening secession if the Republicans were to win. He did nothing to solve that problem. And I think, you know what? You can say what you want. His vice president was John C. Breckinridge. His Secretary of War would later become a leading member of the Confederate government. And one of the things they did in the end of his term was they started sending military surpluses into southern garrisons. He did nothing to alleviate pressure. He did nothing to speak anything. He did not go to his vice president when his vice president lost and said, please God, let us have peace. He did nothing, and because of his inaction, the American Civil War happened. This is the kind of issue you have with politicians. He's a politician. He talked to, he's like Aaron Burr, smile more, talk less. But because of that, he single-handedly, which it's not single-handedly, you had 12 other presidents before him. 15 presidents, because Lincoln's 16th. You had 15 presidents before Lincoln who did nothing to address the issue that was plaguing the country. And that is why I rank him at a D. I would rank him at an E, but again, we're putting these modern presidents there. Sorry if I got a little passionate there. The American Civil War is a subject I am very learned in. I study a lot. We're doing a series on the Battle of Gettysburg right now. James Buchanan single-handedly could have alleviated... Okay, single-handedly is a little hyperbolic. I'm a little heated now. He did nothing. He could have plussed the garrisons in the South. He could have removed heavy artillery, heavy weapons. He could have done so many things to make secession not possible. But he chose not to. And that is why I rank him at D. Alright, folks. Sorry I got a little heated there. Like I said, Civil War is a subject I cover quite extensively on this channel. It's just my opinions about James Buchanan. Again, I apologize. I did get a little heated. Next video, we will be starting with Abraham Lincoln and ending with Jimmy Carter. Again, this video is already an hour long. For those of you that stay till the end, thank you so much. I know God, I know I'm probably going to have a lot of people in the comments complaining about my ratings and everything. It is what it is. I'll deal with it. I always do. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.